Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to this Knotch webinar. Today we're going to talk about how to fail fast to grow faster. Just to give everybody a minute to set up, get connected to the audio, I just wanted to say hello and a few housekeeping details. We are here on Zoom, so we are hopeful that this is an interactive experience. I think a lot of people are familiar, but just in case you are not one of them, got a few things for you to participate with. The first, we have a chat down at the bottom. One thing to note about the first time you drop something in the chat box, you have two options. You can either send it to only the host and panelists, or you can send it to everyone. If you're hoping to get some reactions from the rest of the crowd, be sure to flip that to the everyone side of things. The first question I would like to hear from in our audience is just, where are you joining us? Megan and I just had this great little realization. We're just like hours apart right now, which in the digital world feels incredible. I'm in Kansas City, Missouri. She's vacationing in the Ozarks and has been incredible enough to join us. Ian, I think you're also somewhat nomadic and you're joining us from
Portland, Oregon.
Heyo, very nice. David, I know that you're East Coast. Where exactly are you?
I'm sitting in the bucolic town of Darien in Connecticut.
Darien, Connecticut. I always say it wrong, but I can't say what I always think it is because this is a polite webinar. And then Cindy, where are you joining us from?
Cisco, California.
Very good. So full representation. We just need someone to chime in from a mountain time zone, and we've got all four. There are an impressive number of Midwesterners and Central Time people on this call. I always love to give a shout out because I feel like not as well represented as the coast. So yay! As we come in, so that was the first one. There's someone who just used the Q&A to answer. So thank you for pointing that out. The Q&A is open throughout, and I do my best to watch that and field those questions live to the panel so that you get your answer in context. Also, frequently, it does a great job of spurring conversation and taking us down a slightly more detailed path. So we're here to talk about pilot programs, how to, we said fail fast in the title. Hopefully after this, you will have some tips to succeed fast and then implement those programs throughout your content marketing, full stack marketing, whatever it might be marketing, or even broader program. So with that, I want to do a really quick round robin just to see who's here on our panel and a little bit more about why we invited you. So Cindy, you are first on my screen. Could you let us know?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Cindy. I am the Global Content Strategy Lead for Square. And Square is a highly product-oriented company. And so we do a ton of pilots. We are testing all the time. So I'm really excited to kind of share insights and learnings and really talk with everyone else on the call.
Megan, why don't you go next?
Sure. I'm Megan Baker. I am the Director of Content Marketing at Enterprise Holdings, and we own Enterprise, Alamo, National Rent-A-Car, as well as a myriad of lines of business for mobility solutions. And I'm really excited to be here. We are a scrappy, really creative team, and we do a nice balance of tried and true, but also piloting new thinking to make sure that we engage our audiences. So I'm excited to be part of the conversation today.
Thanks for joining us. Ian?
Hi, everyone. Ian Port here. I'm Director of Content at Zillow. I sit in Zillow's creative team, so I come more from the creative executional side of things as opposed to the sort of the strategic or side of things. Coming to you from Portland. I'm on a nomadic lifestyle trip right now, which has been pretty fun. And I've had the pleasure of working with David and the folks at Knotch on a number of pilots here at Zillow, so have a lot of lessons to share about that.
All right, and David, why don't you round us off?
Great, thanks, Ellen. Hi, everyone. I'm David Brown. I'm head of strategy at Knotch and have been in the pilot business all of my career, first as a direct marketer and more recently as a content marketer. And I'm excited to hear from the panel what some of their lessons, good and bad, have been in the pilot arena. Ellen, thanks very much for setting this all up for us.
Oh, I'm happy to. And apparently there's a birthday in the audience. You must know Steve because Steve did not tell us it's his birthday. So happy birthday, Steve.
Yeah, Steve is a former creative director partner of mine, and we actually share the same birthday 2 days apart. So we have a history of celebrating with a workshop on one of our birthdays.
That's true. We thought about scheduling this one on your birthday and you politely requested a bit of cover.
That's right.
So
Sorry,
happy
Steve.
belated and happy actual birthdays. So let's start off. Topic important to establish: what is a pilot and why are they helpful? And David, why don't you start us off?
Thanks, Ellen. We thought it'd be important just to get some definitions in place for what a pilot is, and particularly in comparison to a program. But in our view, a pilot is an experiment or a test which is reversible. It's not something you would necessarily want to build infrastructure around, but it's an experiment to meet your objectives in a new and interesting way. And if it works and you want to scale it, that's when it would cease to be called a pilot and it becomes a program. So a program is more of an annuity, something which you can build a plan around on a regular basis. But pilots come and go. Hopefully more than half of them work. But generally speaking, I suspect maybe 1 in 3 work and 2 in 3 don't, which is fine because you actually learn more from your failures than you do from your successes, which is why we've named this workshop Fail Fast, and don't view that as a weakness. It's actually a strength.
Completely agree. Megan, what else do you think about this?
Yeah, I think David hit on the core elements that we look at when we're looking at a pilot program. I think the key there is that it's designed to learn from. So we're testing something that maybe, and it could be an emerging platform, it could be a program that we believe could be successful based on insight, based on an audience need. But I like that caveat of reversible. If it doesn't work, you haven't gone so far in that you can't back out of it and pivot direction. So I think really great pilots are designed as much for the learning, whether the success or failure, you build the learning in to make sure that you're getting the most out of running the pilot in the first place.
Forgot how to unmute myself. Yeah, excellent. Ian or Cindy, then either of you want to chime in on this one?
I can chime in. I mean, I think, sorry, Cindy, I love pilots and I wanted to be on this panel, I think, because they're a chance to be innovative. I think it's like a way to be innovative with like relatively low stakes and to like take on things that maybe people are, protective of or uncertain about. And I think that makes them really exciting and fun to work on. And, like you learn a lot from failure, right? Like that's kind of can be a really helpful thing. So whether they succeed or fail, you're ahead at the game usually after you run a pilot, I find.
Yeah, you kind of stole some of the words out of my head too. I agree. I like what you just said about innovating. That was what I was going to say. In a business like mine, we talk about risk quite a lot. So pilots are something that actually can give you coverage to take risk and not assume all of the risk because you're not going all in. So I like what you said there about innovation too.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that I think it's great to hear both of you talking about these positively. I think it's really quickly something people might come to these saying, I'm really nervous to try this out, but you're saying it's really an opportunity.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That also goes to how to manage expectations internally around pilots. Don't message to your executive team or to channel leaders that everything is going to work. Be preparing those teams that it may work or it may not, and just make absolutely sure that within your first group pilots something does work to build confidence, but don't pretend that everything is going to work.
Absolutely. So where do you guys go to look for these pilot ideas? Where's the inspiration coming from? Ian, you want to, I think you have some thoughts.
I do. Well, so as like the kind of creative content person, I'll just like give the intuitive answer first, which is that I think that, if you're paying attention as a content director or as a marketing leader, you probably have a sense intuitively of like work streams or communication streams that could be working harder for you. You probably have seen some new platforms or new opportunities, areas to get in that you think, are interesting. Like, so I think part of my early answer here is going to be like, don't overthink it. I found that some of the best pilot ideas, some of the best opportunities come in those like 5 p.m. Thursday afternoon meetings when you're just like running down the week with the people on your team or your close partners. And you're like, wait, why isn't this doing that? Like this email project should be hitting this goal for us. Or like we could, combine these two goals into, one project in a new medium or something like that. So that's one answer, right? Just like look around and see like what could be working harder for us. The other approach, of course, is to be much more holistic and look at your overall kind of customer journey, content journey, find the weak points, the problem spots, like where's your funnel leaking? Where are people not coming back? What kinds of content are maybe not getting the engagement that you think they should for whatever reason? And just kind of look across your board and see like where can we kind of make improvements in the flow here. But I think, like we talked about, their pilots are a great solution when you think things could be improved or there's an opportunity overall, but for whatever reason, there are barriers to just jumping straight in with the program. Maybe you don't know what to do exactly, or you have potentially some organizational resistance to like trying something or changing something that maybe is supporting a valuable metric right now.
Yeah, those are really good points, Ian. I like the journey is always such a good canvas to think about pilots. I would add to that, when you look at your customer journey, look for white space where there's no content currently, where there's a vacuum, and experiment with injecting content into the vacuum to see what changes, like a product detail page or a thank you for buying this product. Typically, the shopping process content is told to go away, but actually, if you inject content in there, you may get new purchases or new actions really quickly. Another idea which I like to do is steal your competitors' pilot ideas and scale them before they do. Because if you're tracking their pilots, they're taking on some risk on your behalf. And if you follow them and if they stay in market for longer than a month or two, chances are they're probably working. So you should replicate them as quickly as possible. And sometimes you may be able to do it faster than your competitors are actually doing it. And just be aware that they'll be doing the same to you as well. So actually, when you are doing pilots, there's a benefit sometimes to keeping them very private within private channels, so you don't reveal them to your competitors. Private meaning email.
Said in a slightly different way, perhaps keep your finger on the pulse of industry trends and see what might fit with you, just in case David's views might not represent what Knotch actually does. Any other thoughts on this one?
Yeah, actually, I had on the content side, I like what Ian was saying about looking at the funnel. There's an exercise that our teams have done quite often that literally is about the content, where we will, sounds crazy, but we physically will print out a lot of our articles or just the headlines, and we will literally put them out on the table and start grouping them together by intent. We've done this a couple of times, and you would be shocked, especially if you have a program that's been running for a number of years, or you have a publication that goes back as far, in our case, is, gosh, I want to say 2014, 2015. It can get really easy for things to get a little stale, or maybe your team tends to focus mainly on awareness or mainly on conversion, and what about the middle? And every time we've done this, we really do see that we do kind of tend to skew in one or two directions, and there is a gap to fill somewhere, usually along consideration. And that will spur brainstorms to then think of just different tactics, new channels, different ways to kind of fill that gap. So I agree. I think you need to look at the content that you're doing as much as looking at competitors too, just to kind of self-reflect and honestly maybe disrupt yourself. And those are good candidates for pilots.
Yeah, and I like the visual aid that you've presented there
Yes.
too, is to really sit down and map it out. We did have a comment come in from Keith that said the same thing. It's an old magazine trick.
Yeah, love it.
Great. So as you're thinking about creating these pilots, we kind of talked about why you're here, where they come from. What are the decision filters that you use to evaluate which ones to do and which ones not to do?
Well, I can jump in on this one. I love what Ian was saying about the funnel. Where's your funnel leaking? Because we've looked at that sort of as a first step when we've considered pilots. Where are we not meeting an audience need? So looking at that first, is there something that along the journey, a gap we need to fill, and brainstorming ideas there. And when we've looked at, okay, we identified the opportunity, how can we fail small and learn big? So how do we create a pilot that's the right size and scope? We tend to want to do things that the visibility might not be as high. We are in a competitive space. We want to make sure that as we're testing it, we can engage our audience and learn a lot before we expand and we scale further. So those are some of the ways we look at it. I know, we continue to look at our audience needs and iterate accordingly. So we've run pilots on one platform, and then as we've iterated the pilot around a milestone event, let's say, we have learned that it works more effectively on one platform than the other, and we've switched platforms mid-pilot. So it is, is it also flexible enough to sort of change and learn as we go also? So that's another filter we apply.
Ian, what are your thoughts?
That's interesting. I think that's all super helpful, Megan. I think too, like, it's just to like set the big frame and state the obvious. Like, obviously you have to have the resources to do the pilot, right? You have to have the budget, the people, the clearance. Like it almost goes without saying, but maybe not quite. And I think another thing, if I can steal David's mantra here, is that you have to be able to measure the impact of the pilot, because if you can't measure the impact, you're not gonna have any results to show, right? So that's key. You have to be able to like actually identify an objective that you're able to measure and set out to do that. And so what we do at Zillow when we're looking at pilots is kind of look at all of our current pilot opportunities and stack rank them in terms of what's likely to have the biggest impact, what's the biggest priority from a business perspective, and then of course, like, what investment is each one going to require, mainly usually in terms of person time. And I'm not going to pretend like we always take the most totally scientific approach to choosing. Like, sometimes a leader will come in and is like really passionate about this one pilot and really wants it, and so they're going to get it. But we try to be objective about it and look at, what's the investment relative to the potential payoff? What's the potential like business impact here? And sometimes we have great ideas for pilots for parts of the business that we can't always prioritize for whatever reason. Another key filter, obviously, to state the obvious again, maybe, is the quality of thinking behind the pilot. I think pilots that have very specific points of view about what result they're going to drive and a clear, logical, probable hypothesis about how that's going to happen are obviously much more likely to get prioritized than ones that don't. Like, the answer, we're going to talk about failure probably a lot later, but I think, how is this going to fail? And if there's like a lot of ways, maybe you don't want to do that pilot. The last thing to consider is when you're talking about pilots, sometimes success can be more dangerous than failure, in the sense that, what do you do if the pilot is successful and it suddenly takes up a ton of resources? So sometimes you can get so excited by a pilot and so focused on executing it that you don't maybe stop to think like, well, what if my team had to do this every week? I'm coming from a meeting actually about a pilot where my team has had to create 5 new unique pieces of content every week to support this pilot, which is a big lift. And, so there's like a very high bar for success there. So, measurement, if it works, what's the impact? How big is the business impact? How important is the audience? And if it succeeds, how can we operationalize it? Those are usually the filters that we put together.
Great.
That's great stuff. Ellen, do you mind showing a slide? Ian, I thought you were going to go down that path. So we, just as a gift for our audience, we wrote a version of a go, no go checklist and this is, who knows whether these are the right questions, but typically you should be asking these types of questions. Does the assignment align with an important objective? Can you implement it quickly with existing resources? Is the assignment repeatable and scalable? Is the assignment incrementally measurable? And kind of more of an internal point is, does this pilot does it improve the perception of the content team within your organization? Most content teams are fighting for credibility, fighting to be at the big boy, big girls table, and pilots are a way of doing that. If you can take four of these 5, chances are you've got a good pilot to go forward. 3 or less, you probably need to keep thinking. And this is an asset, and if anyone's interested in getting this, feel free to take a photo of it or let us know in the message section, and Ellen and I will send it to you right after.
Yeah, we formatted it just really quickly into this checklist so that you can send it around to your teams, think about it as a group, come back together and understand if you've got 4 out of 5 or fewer. And I also wanted to just underline a bit of what Ian said, is that it needs to be measurable, yes, but the first half of being measurable is knowing what your outcome you're going for, what business outcome you're mapping against. So using that tie to decide on metrics or some measuring stick of understanding what needs to happen. Cindy, I'll give you a chance to chime in just in case, and then we'll keep going.
Yeah, I think Ian mentioned something that definitely resonates with me around operationalizing. As a matter of fact, I think in a lot of the pilots that we've done, especially I want to say in the last year, they have an operational component that we're also piloting. So I would say like the biggest killer of the future of a program is not having at least at the minimum like a shape of an idea that if it were to succeed, here's how we would get it done. We don't go so far as to like do full discovery or like, you know, start outlining details of a process or anything. But at that initial brainstorming proposal phase of things, where we're putting something in front of leadership or talking amongst each other, we talk about the scale component. Just because if you yourself can't envision what the long-term future of your potential program might be, you're kind of already not going to set yourself up for success. I would also say that as we've done this more and more, it kind of shifts the conversation a little bit too. To your point, David, about content teams fighting for a seat at the table, you're fighting for resources, you're fighting for attention, you're fighting for budget, you're fighting for headcount. Being able to have sort of like a horizon in mind, again, not to the point that this is the exact plan of how we're going to have, 12 podcasts going forward globally, but just a shape, something that allows you to kind of communicate that you see what the future could be, paint that picture a little bit. And ultimately, I think it comes down to something that hopefully we all are really good at, which is you're telling a story. The buy-in to actually get the pilot off the ground is an exercise in storytelling. The process of even the midpoint of your pilot, if you're seeing some crazy stuff that you weren't expecting, that's another exercise in telling the right story. And then once you actually get the results, whether they're what you were hoping for or not, it's another chance to come together and tell another story. So I think that's one reason why I love pilots so much for content marketing, because I do think it plays into a lot of the innate strengths that people who are kind of in this industry have. I think it's just a matter of kind of getting together some of the tools and honestly borrowing a lot of inspiration from other disciplines, like product development, actually, that can be really, really helpful. And again, just set you up for success to have the right kinds of conversations about what you hope to get to.
Are there any indicators that you would look at to say, yes, this pilot program will have a high probability of success? David, anything from your experience?
Yes, I think just to build on Cindy's point, if you're designing a pilot and you have more than one key stakeholder, that's probably an indicator that the pilot's going to work, because you've got more support than if you have one stakeholder. So if you're meeting, for example, one audience team and then a product team and a channel leader, if they're all behind you, they're probably going to keep investing in the pilot until they find success. The other characteristic I've seen is that the lowest resource asks almost inevitably lead to high returns, because the bar is so low. It's going to work to a degree. And lastly, if you experiment in areas where you're already getting high response rates, it's much easier to lift a high response rate to even higher response rate than it is to get a 0 response rate to 0.1 or 1%. So don't be afraid. For example, in the car world, if 15% of car quotes turn into a sale, it's relatively simple to get that to 16.5% or 17%. It's very hard to go from 0% to 2%. So go looking for where engagement rates or response rates are already high and make them even higher. That's I've always seen that as a low-hanging fruit type pilot where something good is going to happen because you've already got a lot of audience movement going in the right direction.
Great. So we talked a bit about what it is, how we need to be thinking about it. And I think now let's get into a bit more of the tacticals. So what is it that you would do? How would you actually go build resources and infrastructure? Sometimes I would also lump buy-in into this question for a pilot program. Megan, you want to kick us off?
Sure. I think the first thing that, I think buy-in is the first and foremost. I think what David just said, building on his point of collaboration with other teams, once you have strategically aligned, again, laddering to those business goals that Ian mentioned, if you have the objective agreed upon and aligned upon with the teams involved in a collaborative effort, that is your first powerful piece of the narrative, as Cindy was saying about storytelling, to gain that alignment, is saying, we think this will work. It's not just the content team saying this is multiple teams saying this will deliver against a business objective. And then I think the key is you have a low barrier of entry. So, as I said, when we talk about pilots, we talk about failing small. So that is a small financial investment. Here is the size of the pilot we're going to do, and this is what we've allocated. And if you can, ideally allocate sort of if you get the seat at the table and the buy-in for content innovation in general, as within your department, if you're lucky enough to have that, then you are the team, because I think that's true. As I've talked to other content marketing leaders, we are the teams sort of tasked with pushing the envelope, innovating on behalf of our marketing teams. And if you get that permission and that sort of budget, then you've already got a bit of the ahead of time blessing. I will say, I totally echo what everyone has said up to this point. If you are doing a pilot that cannot be scaled or cannot be sustained by your current team, you're in a lose-lose situation. So we have oftentimes piloted with agency resources, just from a nuts and bolts standpoint. We've got great agency partners who have worked with us, who know our brands, our audiences really well. And we will present the pilot with those resources first, or with freelance resources first, with, of course, a plan that if it does succeed, how would we roadmap to a more permanent infrastructure that would support it?
We had a question come in. We've actually had two questions come in, so apologies, Roland, that I'm just now getting it to yours. First one, though, I'll send out is from Pragati. She's asking, how long do your typical pilots last? Do you set those time limits before you before you launch them, or is it something that you would wait and see?
I can jump in. I think it depends on the pilot itself. As I mentioned before, we had a pilot that was a live stream around a milestone event. That's a one and done sort of a thing. We had a bit of a media promotion leading up to it. So you're talking maybe a 3-week period of really live in market, with a full 8-week from launch to finish and wrapping. So we've had other pilots that have run with a media support campaign for up to a quarter within the business year.
Yeah, it's important to get to significance. And as soon as you get a significant result, statistically speaking, that's when you can scale to a program or cancel. And for some of us, you may be able to get that in hours. Like just knowing the open rates for an email in the first hour often is enough to know whether you've got something or not. But for others, you may have to wait a whole cycle. Like if you're talking to pre or postnatal women, you may have to wait 9 months for you to experiment with a content idea in formula, for example. So it really depends what your audience journey is.
Cindy or Ian, did you have any thoughts on length and establishing that before or after?
Yeah, for me, I would really strongly advise establishing it before you launch, just to set expectations across the team. I mean, I think you should have a sense going into the pilot, again, if you have a clear objective that you're measuring against, like how long, like David said, you're going to need to run that pilot to get significant results about any incremental improvement. And I think it's just easier sort of organizationally. If you say we're going to do this for X period of time going in, and then it's going to stop and we're going to evaluate it, then just to kind of like let it run. We'll get into some of the challenges with that later, because it can be a challenge when you have a successful pilot. If your stakeholders are going to say, well, why are we going to stop running it if it's successful? But we can talk more about that later. But I would recommend knowing the time before you get it.
Spoiler alerts, Ian, spoiler alerts. That's great. Cindy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would totally agree with setting that expectation before. Again, it can be a part of that initial conversation on what your vision really truly is. That being said, I actually was just racking through my brains of probably the last 6 months of pilots, because we have a ton of them going. And to be very honest, they do range. We have some that have been running actually this entire year. They're probably going to continue all the way up until September, October. We have some that have been super quick, but those, I guess maybe one way to think of it is, where did the originating, I don't know, nugget, what was it that originated the pilot in the first place? That kind of might indicate sort of what you're going to end up looking at in terms of time. Like if I start bucketing some of our current pilots that are kind of wrapping up right now, there is kind of like a group, ones that came from some sort of customer insight, like internal data from like our product teams, or looking at our funnel, like the conversion funnel, not just the marketing funnel. Those have usually tended to be some of the quicker ones, because it comes from a conversation about, hey, someone comes to our team and they're like, we've noticed that there are a whole bunch of people that are visiting, this page, and they're going off to this set of articles. And so that's something that we want to act on right away. And that is quick. And to David's point, you can usually also, if you want to set the expectation, you can kind of back into looking at your traffic, kind of make an estimation of whatever the conversion event rate might be for you. And then you can kind of get a sense for how long it might take. I think in some cases it could be a couple of weeks. But yeah, I think it just depends on what was it that spurred the pilot in the first place. Another example would be pilots that we have put together that were more a part of like our annual planning. Those are usually like financial forecasting based types of pilots. So those are going to be usually your big, long, very much have like monthly kind of checkpoints for the whole entire year kinds of programs. So that's kind of my 2 cents around some thoughts on different ways that we kind of gauge the amount of time that they run.
Yeah, I saw the whole panel nodded along with you, but I think a way to sum that up too is you're thinking of, where did this idea come from? So did it come from Ian's Thursday afternoon aha moment, or did it come from stepping back and looking at your holistic strategy and wondering, what if we tried X?
Yep.
Great. We did have one question come in. Kevin is asking about Megan's comments of using the agency as a way to minimize some of your risk. He's wondering actually the inverse. He goes more in-house because he then has more control over the exact kind of dial turning of the resources you're using. What are your thoughts on the whole panel's thoughts on pros and cons of either?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely benefits of each, and I hear you. I think we have done both. We piloted something that ended up being a long-term program that was once a very, very big agency resource part of our budget. And then we're able to, we decided we would sunset that and then pilot doing it in-house with freelancers, with in-house oversight. And that has been tremendously successful, so much so that we've kept it going as a long-term program. So completely hear you, Kevin, on that, because I do think that, there's the obvious, an agency is going to have skin in that game. If they present something, they're going to present it in a way that makes you buy in. And, so you have to be very, very strategic in how you're evaluating those things. We have looked at pilot ideas from our partners, or we have brought ideas forward and said, okay, it's a solid insight, it's a solid idea. Is the timing right? Do we have the strategic alignment to do it? Do we have the permission as a brand to do it? It's a great content idea, but does enterprise have permission to talk about XYZ in the marketplace? Or is a consumer going, why is a car rental brand talking to me about this? So I think the advantage of using an agency is that you can put very clear parameters around it, and they are working very hard to ensure success because they want to continue to have your business as a partner. They want to see you succeed as well. And we, I think part of that comes into selecting the right types of partners to work alongside you, those who understand your strategy, believe in your strategy and support it. And then really at the outset, setting clear expectations for all parties involved to say, this pilot is going to be a set time, a set budget. This is our learning agenda. This is what we're looking to understand and to, if it succeeds, how we would build. So yeah, I think there are benefits to both. Agency resources are going to be a little bit more expensive, but easier to turn on and off, honestly.
Yeah.
I think, go ahead, David.
I was going to give the agency response, but maybe we should get the clients in the room to believe it for themselves. Ian, why don't you go next?
Yeah, I think, one way that I've thought about this, and this might be somewhat specific to a company like Zillow that has a B2C audience and a B2B audience, is just in my experience, we work with some incredible agencies at Zillow and at the various Zillow brands, and they really do awesome work. In my experience, it's been much easier to have successful content work done by agencies when it's consumer facing than when it's B2B. For whatever reason, like just the nuances of our B2B audiences, like it's complicated. The business is complicated. The landscape is complicated. And I just find that internal resources tend to be able to speak to those audiences a little bit more. It's a little bit easier to get to the final result of the content that you're proud to send out. So that's one way to think about it too, is just like what tool is going to be the easiest to use on a particular audience, whether it's an agency or an internal audience or internal resources. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Ian. I did want to add one caveat. I think you always, we just had a pilot that launched for our B2B audiences, and the involvement of the in-house team was a heavy lift. So we did use agency resources to create the content, but that strategic direction, that that in-house energy and reviews, there's only so much you can outsource. So you do have to keep that in mind. So I think that's a really good point.
So speaking as a former agency leader, if you don't have an agency and you're thinking of using an agency for a pilot, chances are it's going to take more time to find an agency than it is to run the pilot. So I think the agencies which can be helpful for pilots are ones where you have a lot of trust built up and expertise in the agency who can move on this. And I suspect an agency team may be more fearless than a client team. So if you want to really dial up the risk, then that's where having an outside perspective can just make you take a bigger risk, which you may not otherwise take. And I had just an example of that. No one on the panel will know this, but in the mortgage arena, I was in a team where we were looking at the call to action buttons. And call to action buttons are often viewed not as content, but they're almost religiously strict in terms of it's buy now or ask to speak to an advisor or something else. And someone in the room said, call to action buttons, they're content, aren't they? And actually that then inspired a pilot to say, well, if call to actions are content, then let's experiment with them. And actually what the pilot was a pilot called contextual CTAs, which is rather than saying ask for a quote in a button, the contextual part was, now that you've read this article on refinancing, ask for a quote. And the response rates doubled or tripled. So if you contextualize your CTA, response rates will go up. I've seen that pilot replicated in multiple industries. And the idea came from, don't view a CTA as a non-content object. It's as much content as an article, and content teams are rather good on call to actions to connect it to the content they've created. There you go. That's my free idea for the day. I'll go quiet now.
That's
I actually
really
have a good story
idea.
I want to tell too, about the agency. Just another perspective to add to the amazing things everyone has already said about it, because there is a lot to consider. I really agree. I think it just seriously does depend. But my story is going to be about our podcasting pilots. We have multiple, And the journey with that started, actually predated my time kind of even discussing this at Square. By the time I kind of entered into the chat, we'll just say, I had come to learn that podcasts as a channel had been up for discussion internally for about 4 years. 4 years of talking, and it's not for lack of enthusiasm. It wasn't for lack of intention or anything like that, but it actually was maybe more coming from maybe a little bit of fear. It was just so net new for our teams that the thought of how the heck would we do this, I think, came up pretty frequently without a lot of answers. And so by the time I came around, I got the context, I got the history. People kind of told me there was a lot of emotions, I think. 4 years of talking about it, that, it's such a buildup, right? And I think what had happened is that over all that time, the amount of pressure that had kind of gotten placed around just the idea of a podcast coming from our brand kind of just took over. And so my first thought, once I learned all of this and people told me a bunch of things, was, what if we use our agency? And the reason was because the agency is not involved in that emotional internal struggle. They are not part and parcel to like having heard over all those years sort of all the reasons not to do it or why to do it or anything like that. They are a fair third party who is invested in your success, especially if it's someone that you have had that agency relationship. I think someone mentioned that for a long time. That's great. So I brought it to them. We talked about it. And basically, long story short, that decision was what got us out of this weird cycle of inaction and actually executing the pilot. And one of the reasons is really practical also. It's not just the emotional conversation, but agencies, content agencies in particular, because content agencies operate differently than your typical media agency or a digital agency. Content agencies are really good for things where they already have the infrastructure. So for podcasting, for example, all the internal struggle conversations that were being had were like things like about sound, where we capture our audio, and like who's going to buy all the mics, and all of that, right?
No one has that experience because you've been content marketers your whole life, not podcasters.
Exactly. An agency, however, they do that with all kinds of clients. They have all the equipment, they have sound engineers, they have people who can cut audio, turn it around in 24 hours. So I would consider agencies as a really good lever when the internal struggle might be just, honestly, it's too much to think about, too hard to understand, because an agency is already going to have figured that out. So you get to focus your attention instead, I think, on something Megan said, which is the strategy, distribution, how you're going to reach your audience, instead of kind of spinning wheels around how the heck to get the thing done. So I have to say that story is a good one for us because it unlocked podcasts. And people still talk about that to this day. They're like, you're the one that got us out of the cycle of terribleness around podcasting. And we finally got it done. And it's great because now we're not talking about it anymore. Now we're talking about how to keep improving it. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of the agency.
I love that.
One question, can I ask one question about that?
Yeah.
Because I think I'm curious if in that process you also used the agency's experience with piloting podcasts for other brands and say, hey, internal team, our agency has done this previously with 3 other clients. Was that part of what you lean on? We've done that, a little bit of that. I was wondering if that came into play.
Oh, 100%. And actually, that was one of the earliest conversations. Once we knew that we wanted to engage them on it, I think one of the first meetings we had was me asking them for white labeled, information or case studies for that, just to, it was a good tool for me to honestly shift the internal conversation away from questioning whether or not it was a good idea by, putting some success from other people in front of them. And then also being able to actually speak to, I had all the answers to what the questions had been all that time because I was able to kind of share at a high level what the process looked like for those other clients too. So it definitely calmed everyone down. I think it built a lot of trust. And again, it finally flipped that switch that really had been just not flipped for so long, and allowed everyone to stop thinking like, can we, should we, and into like, no, we can. And this is what it's going to look like. And this is how it'll get done.
Yeah, I think what I hear too for this is that's a really strong case for showing the risk of inaction. I think 4 years ago, a branded podcast would have been avant-garde. It would have been like, you're kind of at the forefront of this thing. And even though you didn't have the experience, can we, like Megan said, push that envelope in content? So it's, I think I'm sure you've thought of this too, but it's like, it's something to point to say, we got in our own way for this, and how can we go forward with it, with the pilot for, you know, to tie it back to what we're talking about here, or whatever else might make sense.
You are 100% correct. I would not be lying if I didn't say I bring up that podcast story internally during annual planning, during quarterly marketing reviews. And actually, it's become a part of, I think, the weird fabric kind of our marketing culture. Other teams, not just content marketing teams, also talk about that as an example of what we never want to do again. There was a lot of self-reflection there, and now people, I think, that everyone is so comfortable now with not just standing still and thinking about things to the point that you don't move. We really have built a different culture since that time, from the ground up across all of marketing now. And it's a huge relief because, yeah, we don't want to do that ever again.
Congrats to you. I think that is huge. That's a monumental moment in your career too, as much as it is shifting your pilot programs. You shifted a whole trajectory of a company. So yay, good job.
Oh,
Cindy.
thanks.
Yeah, I think what we're talking about, it's really interesting. It's about capital. Like, how much capital do you have inside your business to get an idea pushed through? And we probably all need to think about how much capital we have and how to increase it, because every pilot, whatever we say about failing or succeeding, is going to add or detract from our personal capital. And that's why it's important that within your first group of pilots, you have a must-win idea, something which builds confidence and allows you then to take a bigger risk. That your first set of pilots, you shouldn't be taking big risks, ideas which you're not sure whether they work or not. You should be doing pilots which you almost can guarantee are working, and then take your risks in the second year or third year. You don't need to take them in the first 3 months of a new assignment or a new role.
So let me ask the inverse of that question, David. If you don't have the social capital or the internal capital, how do you get buy-in from other people who might?
Yeah, you can borrow someone else's capital and find stakeholders who have pain which you can solve. So Cindy, Megan, and Ian all work in big, complex companies. There are so many stakeholders where I think the opportunity is to go looking in other departments, in other areas, for opportunities where content can help, where both the content and marketing team can help, but maybe customer success, customer service weighs in, or product weighs in. And then if the head of product probably has a lot of capital, borrow that person's capital to drive a pilot. And if anyone questions it, says, well, look, the head of product is behind this, probably means it's going to happen. It's the bridge building. Cindy, the way that you described your role, it sounds like you spend more than half of your time building the case for work, telling the story about the story rather than writing the actual story. That's a sign of success, actually. Whilst it may be frustrating to people who love to create work, actually, if you're evangelizing your work, it's never a bad thing. I've never heard anyone say, I don't evangelize enough.
Ironically, we were just talking about that. I was sat in on the Association of National Advertisers content marketing meeting this morning, and that exact topic came up, to where a big part of your role as someone who wants to run a pilot will be the buy-in, but then also just if you are a content marketer, if you're a growth marketer, whoever it is, like making sure that that is a piece of your job, like however much portion of it will depend on your role and what needs to happen next, and how much buy-in already exists. But there needs to be some dedication to explaining. I think similar to what we talked about at the top of this, like a portion of that checklist is it going to improve content marketing's or the department's view with it internally? Yeah,
one good trick to do that, and Ian, I'm not going to give a trade secret away, but your Megan, your strategy partner, within Zillow writes meticulous briefs for every pilot. And that serves two purposes. One is it helps everyone execute in a way which is consistent. But anyone who's looking into the pilot, rather than having to have a meeting or set something up, you can just say, read the brief. And the brief then becomes chapter and verse in terms of what's happening. So if you have good briefs, that increases probability of success for pilots. And if you don't have a brief format, let Ellen and I know, because within our community, within our pros and content community, we've crowdsourced some brief templates, which we're happy to share if anyone is interested.
Yeah, that's a great point, David. I think the briefs are totally essential. And one of the fun things about pilots is that perceptions of them have a way of changing as the pilots are running, or as you get halfway through and the results are different. And like a lot of that can kind of derail you into the kind of failure territory if you're not careful. But having that great brief that has, and I love Meghan's format of just like the one sentence objective is just so helpful and just like locks everyone in terms of exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to make this one single number go up, and here's our theory of how to do that, and why we think it might not happen, or why it might not happen, not why we think it won't. I think the evangelizing point is so valuable too. And I think it's important to evangelize for the role of content, not just up, but a kind of across. And I think when you are looking for support for pilots, if you maybe don't have the capital internally, getting that from folks who are like, maybe they're interested in what content can do, but one of the first kind of conversations I always have with my partners in marketing is like thinking about an identifiable objective for every piece of content, and just coming to the conversation with that as the starting point rather than the kind of like the ending point, I think really helps you build support eventually broadly and then eventually upwardly for the role that content can play, especially when you are actually delivering on that, right? When you get someone who's like, oh, I want this piece of content, and you're like, okay, well, what's this content going to do? And like, well, it'd be great if it do this. And if you do that, you're golden. I mean, do that a few times and you will have the capital to run pilots.
I love it. So we're kind of starting to get into the latter half of this particular broadcast, which means I want to shift to pie in the sky. Your pilot is a success. How do you take it from pilot program to ongoing program? Cindy, what do you think?
Oh gosh, I have so much to say about this part. So I think the first thing, I'm just going to call it back to what I said a little bit earlier, and I think a lot of the other folks echoed this, which was it starts at the beginning. Actually, if I love what you're talking, I love briefs. I really do. I love briefs. I love plans. I love proposals. The documentation, and not for the sake of work though. Do it with the right intention of being clear with the goal and clear with stakeholders what you're hoping to achieve and where you're going to go and all of the good things that we've already talked about. But that is where then converting things into a program starts. If you don't do that little pre-work, if you don't have those conversations early, and honestly, on the evangelizing point, I'm going to add that part of the job is repeating yourself. You don't just say one time, we're going to do this, yay. You're going to have to talk about it repeatedly in multiple groups of people, multiple meetings, bring it up as often as you can. I'm plugging stuff constantly just to keep it top of mind. I don't want people to forget because momentum is something that you want to keep as well. So that by the time you get those results, and hopefully you've had, if you're really lucky, you've already seen early indicators pretty much right away that tell you, okay, this is really going to happen. So you can kind of start to prepare. And then from there, for myself anyway, and our teams, goes back to the story. That's the first thing that we focus on right away is how are we going to frame this for all of our stakeholders, for all the people who also supported us, frankly, because that's a key part of it as well. How are we going to now talk to them about what we just saw and now get everyone to shift gears from maybe to yes? It's all in the framing. It's in the language you use. I don't want to get into details about decks and things like that, but all of those communication mechanisms that you're going to start to put together, your deck reviews or your updates, your email comms, all that stuff. pay attention to what you're saying. You want to say things in a way that instills excitement. You want to get everyone on board. And then from there, once you've kind of marketed the fact that this is happening, this is real, we got the results we want, we're now going to move forward with this rollout, then it's time to get in gear in terms of road mapping all of your next steps, getting tactical, making your plan to actually get all the infrastructure in place, make sure your resources actually are secured. At this point, you might be doing things like signing contracts and things like that, but try to do that as quickly as possible, because you want that excitement to then continue from the planning into the actual action itself. So in the case of podcasts, for example, that next phase, once we told everyone, no, this is real, this is happening, we're going to do multiple series now, it was a lot of discussion around just sort of who's going to be directly responsible, who's going to take ownership over the measurement. And then everyone kind of had their assignments, and then everyone kind of moved forward. And then at that point, you're kind of in real program mode, treating it like a part of the rest of your, sort of evergreen work, which is really exciting to get to that point. Once something has really become a part of your entire program, I think that's a lovely place to be, because then you kind of breathe a little bit. And then you get into the next phase of things, which is, I think, also important, that even once your pilot is a program, you don't stop piloting in the program you just started. So in podcasts, for example, we are experimenting. We will never stop. I mean, you kind of have to. You just don't know what's going to resonate with your audience. They surprise us all, I think, all the time. And so that actually, even just showing that there's going to be longevity in experimentation of this program that was born out of a pilot, that has tended, for me anyway, to also gain additional buy-in and support on like the financial and budget side too. Basically, you just want to show that everything has legs, and you don't want anything to get stale, even when you think you've kind of hit a good spot with rolling out the program.
Totally. I think that's great, Cindy. And I think too, I think it can happen that you run a pilot and it succeeds, and there's still kind of like the lift or the marketing of the success that needs to happen, and the kind of like the preparation for it. On my end, it happens a lot the other way around, that it succeeds and the enthusiasm can be so strong that there isn't even a moment to kind of stop and breathe and say, okay, what worked? How do we operationalize this? So sometimes, the leash can get pretty far ahead of you. And it's something to think about when you're going into a pilot, that like, if it succeeds, some of your stakeholders are like, we're not turning this off now. We're driving this, like we're signed up for this now. It's going. So I think in that case, like thinking about how you're going to operationalize it, like toward the end of the pilot, if that's likely to come around and you're going to have to like hustle really quickly to make this possible at whatever cadence you're working on, is key. So yeah, just it can go really either way. And sometimes it's really easy to like have a pilot convert to a program. And sometimes it's almost like another project to make that happen.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, depending on the size and scope, we've got one running right now where the socialization, Cindy, when you were saying decks, I was laughing. I'm like, yep, there's all
so many decks,
so many decks, so many presentations, and a lot of, socialization across not just the marketing organization, but the business organization. And you owe those people the follow-up, the chapter 2 of your story, to say, here's what we saw. Here's the success that we saw, and why we want to continue and create this as an ongoing program. And in many cases, across the board, sure, there's the success that, we reached the objective we wanted. If there were other legs to it, so for example, it performed really well across these 3 metrics, which were already our primary KPIs, but secondarily, we really wanted it to be valuable to the sales teams, for example. If that's not working for those operators, how are we then iterating? They want to know. They are owed that follow-up and the collaborative effort to find a way to, is there a way to make this work harder or better for the sales teams to expand the success of this? If we're going to invest in it being a long-term program, how do we then make sure that we tighten up the pieces that, for a test and learn, we were willing to be a little, more risky. If we want to invest long-term, how do we make it work really efficiently, effectively for us long-term. So I love the socialization and the follow-up. There's just as much socialization with the part 2 of that is it succeeded. Here's our next step and how we're going to, tweak and iterate to make it long-term.
So I'm going to take the flip side now. Ian, you referenced this a little bit earlier. What do you learn, or how do you learn from a pilot that has failed?
Yeah, so obviously, I think as David alluded to at the front, like failure is definitely part of the pilot reality, and you do pilots to discover things. And sometimes what you discover is that your idea didn't work. Been thinking about this. I think I would call it like 3 big reasons why pilots like actually fail. The first is really that your hypothesis was wrong, right? That like X new content did not cause Y action to happen for whatever reason. And I think this is like the most interesting kind of failure, because it means that your theory of the case, like your high level analysis, failed, right? Like, so for whatever reason, that's wrong. And you have to go back and think about like, what's another reason why, like, what's another kind of strategy I could get this user to take this action? And that's fun, like that's interesting. A second one that's like maybe a little bit more annoying, but still interesting, is that you think that the hypothesis was right, but your content, for whatever reason, specifically the content, did not achieve the end goal of that hypothesis. It can be hard to tell if you're looking at one or two, like, is it the theory or is it the actual executional work that failed? I think, editorially, there are so many things you can switch up. Like maybe that article should have been a listicle, maybe the CTA should have been in a different place. Maybe the imagery was off-putting, or like maybe someone came in and wrote a bad subject line or something. So there's a lot of like places where you just kind of follow the link in the chain and like look at kind of what was the weak one, you think, and then maybe kind of tweak from there. But you're working in the overall kind of hypothesis that you started with for this pilot. The third kind of form of failure for pilots, I think, is the really scary one, where your hypothesis was right and your content succeeded at achieving that hypothesis, but for whatever reason, the pilot caused unforeseen impacts elsewhere, or the outcome did not prove to be as valuable as you thought. So either the outcome wasn't as valuable, or the outcome actually, caused other reductions in other metrics or other problems that you didn't see coming. I've seen it happen that, a pilot can be designed really well thought through and beautiful, but it turns out that the strategy didn't account for a metric that particular pilot also had to drive, that no one in the early conversations when we were doing those beautiful briefs, we didn't really know that, we didn't really see that. So that's kind of more of an organizational or like a planning shortcoming, and it's definitely the least pleasant kind. But it does happen because sometimes you don't necessarily see all the work that a particular piece of content has to do. And again, it goes back to the importance of looking at those filters for what content pilots you're running and saying like, yes, we have a measurable objective. Are there other objectives that we maybe aren't considering here that we should be considering? So, lots of different kinds of failure. I think thinking about it is really important. And I try to, whenever I'm looking at a piece of work, even if it's just like an email signing off, like thinking about like, how is this going to fail? Like where are the weak links in this piece? And of course, sometimes you'll discover a new way that things can fail. But if you get an unsuccessful pilot, you got to figure out exactly what went wrong, just figure it out and try it again. Sometimes it's big, sometimes it's very just small.
Yeah. That's really excellent, Ian. I love that. I don't want you to say the fourth because you were on the slippery slope. So we'll stop you on there. But one of the things I've seen is when teams start to change midstream on a pilot, often that creates trouble because it probably means the pilot's just taking too long and people are leaving the company or moving to other roles. So you may be in a 6-month zone. And I think the lesson is, if you've got a pilot, race to conclusion, because you never know what's going to happen in 3 months or 6 months time. If the pilot does take longer than 3 months to set up and it's going into the next quarter, it's probably not a pilot to pursue. Try and execute it within the quarter you're in, not in the next quarter, and keep that team together for as long as you can, so you don't have to retrain or wait for new resources to come.
Excellent. I think that was super well summed up, Ian, but I did see both Megan and Cindy came off mute in the middle. So I wanted to give both of you a minute to respond if you wanted to.
Oh no, I just need those 3 points to put up on my bulletin board at work, from now on. How is this, how could this fail? What are is our hypothesis right? No, when you've run enough pilots, you've failed. If you've run successful pilots, or you've failed in one of those ways with, pilots over the years. And I think each of us could show our battle scars from those. But I do think it's really interesting. The third one is painful when you realize, you look back and you go, I ran a really successful pilot. I think the one where we've had that happen is I didn't account for the so what factor. So does it matter to anyone else but the content team that it was successful? So perhaps I got senior level marketing buy-in to run a pilot, but then, it goes from this amount of pilot dollars to a larger amount of a long-term program budget. And then you have to, sell into other stakeholders. And then did you account for it not mattering to them? Does it, you have, they've got other priorities, perhaps, this was not one of them. And so that's one of the more painful learnings we've had is, particularly when you have a great win on a team and then you say, okay, unfortunately, there are other priorities for the business that we didn't account for as we were building this. So how do we learn from that? And I think our team has learned from those, and we account for the making sure everything is strategically aligned. How can we anticipate? And you can't anticipate everything, as we all know from the past couple of years of COVID, but you can't always anticipate things that are going to impact business needs. But as much as possible, how can this be utilized by, how can this content program be utilized by as many teams as possible throughout the department and the business to move the needle and achieve objectives? So flexibility but yeah, I was just nodding because I think we've all been through those. And you learn, everyone says it, but it's true. You learn as much, if not more, from the failures, regardless of the category that's fall into.
Yeah, I wanted to echo everything that everyone's saying. I'm literally recalling some of the failures right now. But one thing I was thinking about, just to kind of add too, is in our teams, we have, it's not official, but I do think that we have like an unofficial sort of agreement with each other that also you don't always have to let the pilot run to completion. We have basically given each other permission sometimes, like if it's not feeling right, you can kind of tell. You can see it sometimes in the numbers. Sometimes you can see it in the work. I actually have had a number of cases where what we thought some deliverable was going to be because of, again, unforeseen or wrong assumptions with maybe our website functionality or who knows what, maybe also even concurrent experience from other teams that are actually running on your pages and things like that. You do need to make a shift, and then you put it out there and you start to look and you're like, this actually, we might have now, we're not going to get what we thought. So we kind of give each other permission to talk about it. If we're looking and we're feeling like it's just not going where we thought it was, just because we were like, this is a pilot and we wanted to run it for 2 months, sometimes that's actually not the right decision. Sometimes the best decision actually is to call it and say, you know what, we're not really seeing any promise that we thought. We want to take a pause, take a breath, and we're going to pivot the pilot. I actually have pivoted so many pilots now that I'm thinking about it, but I think it has to do with our culture of being flexible, and people are very open-minded, and we try not to hold things too sacred. So I think that's another thing to add in terms of failure. If you see it coming, you don't have to wait for it to happen and everything to be terrible. You can make a change at midstream when it makes sense. Don't just do it, for the sake of doing it. But there are plenty of times when it does, that is the right decision to make. Have the conversations, make some adjustments, and then reflight, what you were looking to do. And hopefully that gets you back on track and you don't lose a ton of time, and you're still going to get some additional learnings, plus the learning that you already got that the indicator wasn't showing you what you were hoping it was going to early on.
So I don't intend to pour salt in any wounds. I hope that you have some examples of celebrations as much as your failures. We did have a question come in early on about, do you have examples of pilot programs working or not working? And Cindy, I know not to put you on the spot, but you did just say, I'm thinking of all of them.
I am. Yeah, I was trying to think of what some good ones were. Yeah. So there's many. A couple that actually come top to mind that are kind of easier to talk about would be trying to pick between one of two. We had this pilot that our machine learning team they're always developing like personalization engines of all kinds for all kinds of reasons, for all kinds of channels, and so on and so forth. And they came to us actually because the amount of traffic that we generate is so high that kind of some things that they wanted to validate would be great. We were just a good candidate for our section portion of the site because we would get stat sig pretty quickly for them. So I got super excited about that. I didn't have to come up with this pilot originally, right? That's good. To the point of the relationships that was there, they came to me. So we talked about it, and we came up with a plan that was mutually beneficial so that they could get their data validation. I could get us closer towards another goal that we have had in terms of our customer journey, shortening some decision making and path to sales, for example. And so we got the plan together, picked the pages that we wanted to put it on based on traffic volumes, and implemented the test. It went live, and first bad sign was the load of this module that we had actually put on there, because it was using some back end machine learning stuff, slowed down these pages. And actually it caused an issue where some of our other pixels and things, weren't able to fire correctly and stuff like that. So that was just a fix that we had to put in quick to address. The team was really great to get that done, not a problem. But then we got to a point of a check-in where I wanted to, they were going to tell me sort of like what were the early results so far, what they were seeing with this module. And everything that I was hearing was basically along the lines of, directionally, this. And I was like, okay, when we're talking directionally, like how directional are we? How directional is it? And they gave me the numbers, and it was very small. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, even though we had predicated this entire thing based on volume, the actual results that we were getting so far, there wasn't any volume happening. And so excuse me, we had to have a conversation about, why do we think that is, because the traffic is here, what's going on with this? And long story short, it's like a design and functionality issue. Our page templates where we placed this module, it was literally the only place that we physically could. And we felt like that wasn't doing the test justice, because basically it was towards the bottom. My preference would have been that it was somewhere further up or in line with the content, but that wasn't actually possible. It would have been a huge engineering lift. Like, we would have had to kind of rebuild our templates actually. So we looked, and it was one of those things where I was like, well, you guys aren't going to get, unfortunately, what you need. I'm not really learning anything here because it's not doing anything for us. And so we kind of called it. We iced it though. It's one of those things where there are other projects on our roadmap that are related to our page templates and page designs. So we came to more of an agreement that we would pick this back up, package the tests together a little bit differently when we would do that work. So right now it's not running. We started it, stopped it midstream, didn't get a chance to really see anything, and we're going to have to revisit it again. But yeah, I guess that's not really a failure, but it was, because I was hoping that, in a couple of weeks I was going to have some amazing, AI-based insights about our customers, and no, it wasn't feasible or possible with kind of all of these other things that were happening.
I think to our original point, a failed program doesn't mean a failure, just you have to learn from it.
Yep, absolutely.
Megan or Ian or David, any chime-ins on your favorite failed or success? Pilot?
Sure, I can offer one that the thematic statement being comedy is hard, because I think we ran a campaign for National Car Rental. And National, for those of you who don't know, has the audience is very loyal. It's frequent business travelers historically. That now it's, you know, travelers who want a very frictionless experience. They know the space. They're very savvy. And we had run successful pilots with video content that was humorous in nature that had been very successful. And we were looking to continue with a pilot that was really more directed about the loyalty club. This was failure in the category number 2 of the hypothesis was right, the content was wrong. And it was a casting situation. We had content that went really, really well with a humor, a humorous, really sort of clever bent with our first sort of foray into comedy initially. And in this particular pilot, we cast a different type of a comic personality. And the nice thing about our audience is that they tell us exactly what they think immediately. And so we didn't have to run it very long. To Cindy's point, we called this one. We definitely did not. We actually called it mid-campaign. We didn't end up running all of it because it was apparent that it was just not resonating with our audiences. And that was a tough one because, when you're on the team that makes the casting decisions and you're on set, as part of the production, you're like, well, if you think it's funny but your audience doesn't, you have to then rewind and go, okay, what did I miss? And so we, across all brands now, if we're especially when we're getting into comedy, we try to do pre-testing now with most campaigns, most pilots, but particularly if there's anything that has a humorous bent, we want to get in front of our communities of members, audiences, and get the testing results first. Oh, yay, somebody said love national. I do too. Yeah. But yeah, so that was a tough one because it really is one where you have to have, we as creators, we have a heart for everything we put out there, but you really have to be objective and say, okay, why didn't this work? Well, let's go ahead and get those key learnings, make sure that we archive those and get on the same page as a team, and then move forward and learn and not wallow in the failure, but learn and iterate moving forward. Though Cindy, we actually have a parking lot of ideas that are waiting for when we have components and website flexibility, because they're content ideas that need product lift, and the product lift is going to be too intense. So we create a parking lot of pilot ideas waiting for certain things operationally to be there to support. So feel you on that one.
Yeah, +1 to the parking lot. We have a huge parking lot too.
Right.
I like to say that, in planning, not everything can make your roadmap. There's just not enough resources in the day at all. We're doing so many things all the time, and we want to do all of it. But yeah, things that will fall below the line. I tell our team all the time that below the line, it's not really below the line. It is also where we put stuff to put in the parking lot. We'll just revisit it at another time.
Right.
Ellen, there's a lesson I've learned about finding difficult audiences. The audience list of people who've complained, or people who've even opted out, or ex-clients. Often content can be really effective at bringing those audiences back from the brink, especially complaining customers. If someone takes the time and trouble to complain, sometimes there's only a small tweak you need to make to turn that complaint into a loyal customer. I think there's a famous Harvard Business Review article about how to turn complaining customers into your most loyal customers, and content does that. So don't be afraid by difficult audiences. Chances are no one else is paying attention to them, so a content team can do something special and use what it does well, which is kind of a soft touch to bring those audiences back. It's like a Trojan horse approach.
Yeah, frequently someone who's complaining might actually be a very loyal customer. They want your service to improve. They would like to keep using you, but this didn't work. So how can you reach out to them? You're exactly right that content and the way that you reach out to them can flip them really easily if you have the right tone. I think Megan mentioned this earlier too, is like, is that the right place, or how do you address it as in your brand voice to go forward? So Ian, not to say that you can't share, but we only got about 10 minutes left. And I do want to get to the last question, which is how much of your strategic program should you dedicate to pilot programs? And I'm going to say Megan should go first.
So I think it very much depends on your organization. I mean, that sounds a little bit like a cop-out, but I think it's true. I just in hearing from Cindy and Ian, knowing their context, their companies, it's going to vary. Ours varies. You guys have far more pilots running than we do. But that said, I think there should always be, on a content team, there should always be a percentage of your time, your resources allocated to innovation and testing new things. And that could be testing new platforms, testing new formats, or testing a new message, or variation of a message with your audience. Because we are warming leads, we are creating conversions, we are the teams that are creating the pieces that are reaching audiences on that steady drumbeat and cadence. So I think, being brave and testing various ways of doing that is an important part. So even if it's a 90%, 10% approach, there still should be, even on a tight team, that innovation and that creativity. It also keeps your team energized, because to try new things and to experiment with new things keeps your creative juices flowing, keeps you thinking about how you might push into a new arena and engage your audiences in a new way. So I think at the minimum, a 90-10 split is a starting point.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I'd say for us, it's about 30% right now, but I think the number really, as you said, can go up based on a lot of factors. Like, I think it depends on the team, the resources, and how much room for improvement you think there is. If you're coming into a situation where there's a lot of, like you're surrounded by a lot of legacy comms and you're not sure what a lot of them are supposed to be doing, or you think they could be doing more for you, maybe it's 50%. Maybe you're really moving. And I think it depends on what kinds of pilots you're running specifically too. Like, we're, as a a digital brand, basically we're like virtually all of our marketing, 99% of our marketing is digital. We really are able to experiment pretty much constantly, because we can segment our audience and like choose a pool of people to pilot on, and we're not taking necessarily a huge risk by putting some new kind of content out there for a big audience that's like public, and so we have a little bit more flexibility in that realm. But again, I think the big question is, like, it's about opportunities, it's about the resources, and how much you feel like you have to prove, right? Like, we've talked about how you have to evangelize for content constantly in this world, and I think you want to be able to show your value in novel ways, where I think a lot of people think of content as being a very top of funnel kind of way to play. We're really trying to internally message that content is mid-funnel. It's funnel activation. It's moving people along and helping convert people. And so if you feel like you do have more to prove there, like I feel like we have that to prove, we are running pilots in that direction and spending a lot of resources on them.
Awesome. Cindy, did you want to round us out? And
yeah,
David?
I'd love to. Sorry. Yeah, I agree with how Ian is talking about. It's going to depend. I actually was just kind of thinking for us, and probably a lot of brands actually, COVID, I think, changed the landscape in terms of testing. I mean, I think for better or for worse, that probably forced a lot of teams to have to test, because there was everything was upside down. Traffic was everywhere. I don't know about you guys, but organic search is a huge component of our success. And that was all over the place, because literally what consumers and our customers were looking for was totally out of whack. But coming out the other side, I mean, where we're at right now, for our business, we have, first and foremost, like, I think we keep talking about a cookieless future. So that has increased, I want to say, in like the last year and a half, especially, the appetite for us on the content marketing side to test new channels, test new audiences on the existing channels, because they're counting on us, I think, in the long term forecast and just our outlook for marketing to pick up a lot more of the growth as opposed to your traditional performance advertising. So that's one thing that I think has increased our share. And then the other thing is, again, on the business side, our product ecosystem, because it is for businesses of all sizes, as you can imagine, we have a ton of all kinds of socioeconomic things going on for our sellers that affect our business and their success. So right now, to Ian's point, I actually think that we are probably at about 50%, 50-50 pilot, 50 evergreen, always on, tried and true. But that's because also that the ask of us and my team specifically is growth. And in order to generate growth, you have to run pilots for that. It's an interesting place to be, I will say. It means that also a lot of, if you're in that spot, a lot of your time is going to need to be spent actually looking at financial stuff. I think you need to keep tabs on, honestly, even like where you stand in terms of like what is your contribution to, like, you know, overall attribution. Get in the numbers, don't shy away from those. But that this 50-50 time that we're in right now, that's not been the case the entire time, and it won't be, you know, forever. But at the moment, due to, like, you know, what people are hoping for from us and what they have confidence in what we could deliver, it seems to me like we're at about 50-50.
David, what do you think? And also, what are some closing remarks as we have 4 minutes left?
I think that this has been a great conversation. We've really got into some good details. Just as I was listening to Cindy, to what you were saying, we probably all met a marketer or a content leader who says confidently, I know exactly the best way to go forward. And when I meet those type of people, it always worries me, because no one really knows the best way, because what may have been the best way a year ago is changing, because audience needs are changing, channels are changing, content appetite is changing. And I think content pilots are a great antidote to the know-it-all, to say, well, that you may be right, but let's just test that. And it's a great way just to prick the bubble of confidence or arrogance and keep it real. And I think the bigger the percentage of pilots as a percentage of your budget probably increases your probability of success. Clearly, you can't be all pilots, but if it goes to 0, you've got a problem. If it's 10%, it's probably too low, but 20 to 50% feels realistic, depending on how mature you are and how much testing you've done in the past. And then be retesting those winning pilots 3 years ago. You should retest them just to make sure that they are still working in the same way that you were hoping them to.
Wonderful. I want to extend my thank you, my heartfelt thank you to Cindy and Megan and Ian and David, as always, for your expertise and for joining me today. I know 90 minutes can sometimes feel like a lot. I don't think it did today. I think we flew through so many awesome topics. So anybody on the call with us still, you'll receive a recording of this pretty soon. And we will also be sending out the checklist that you can have to your team, to send around to your team, to just kind of start thinking through how to run a pilot program for success, hopefully, but also to make sure it's measurable from the beginning, that you can tie it to these business outcomes, that you can get all of the buy-in, you can start advocating for your team, and about 7 other awesome things that were coming out of our panelists' mouths today. So thank you again to everybody. And we've got some enthusiasm coming through in the chat too. So thank you everyone for joining us and spending your day with us too. I'll see everyone soon. Bye.